said, man, do you just like going to prison? Like, what is going on? He said, man, everybody goes to prison. And I was like, it was so common to him.
Yeah.
You can never be set free from anything that you think is normal. So any kind of relationship I had, I would leave you before you left me.
Before we get started, can you tell me a little bit about young Michael Pippin?
Yeah.
What was the family household like when you were young? How was your relationship with your parents? Can you describe that to our audience?
So it was very peculiar. I think I have a rare childhood because it was a real dichotomy. So my mother left me with my dad when I was maybe one or so, which is kind of unusual that the mom leaves and the dad stays. So I wound up growing up with just my dad until I was probably 5 when he remarried my stepmother, who is my mom to me. She's been there the whole time. And so in that time, you miss a lot with your mom in those first, what they say 3 to 5 is like these critical years of development when you're little. And so there's aspects of that went missing. And then I grew up in a farm culture, like salt of the earth. Everybody loves Jesus, even if they don't, kind of one of those things.
Yeah.
Where we all talk about Jesus, whether we go to church or actually live all that out. We believe. And so there's that kind of culture. And then my mother's side was they grew up in what we call the city, but inside Plant City. And they grew up they had a different culture. So they actually honored crime. Crime was an honored thing there. Everybody went to prison. All my uncles have done long bids of time, 30 years. My brother did 30 years. I got another brother that did about 30 in different bouts. If you added them all up. And I was having a conversation with that brother one time, and I said, man, do you just like going to prison? Like, what is going on? And because for me, I grew up, really sheltered from a lot of that. And he said, man, everybody goes to prison. And I was like, you really think it was so common to him.
Yeah.
Because literally every man on my mother's side of the family have been to prison. And so growing up and seeing and being exposed to those two different worlds, it really was challenging.
Wow. And that's a great way to just kind of get right into it. Our church has been in a series called Soul Care. And based on this podcast, I'm a big advocate of physical health and mental health, but really spiritual and soul care and soul health. And so it's been a very timely message, and really appreciate you kind of talking this past service about generational kind of curses, sin patterns, things like that. Now, whether you're a believer in Christ or just Christian in general, there is something to say about generational problems. And
there are generational sin patterns that really can plague generation after generation.
Yeah, and so you had mentioned a little bit about your brothers kind of just saying everybody just goes to prison. The question I have is, when you were growing up, can you tell us about some of those patterns that you saw that you maybe didn't see when you were young, but as you got older, or maybe God had revealed to you, or just your own searching through therapy or whatever? How did they come about, and how did you break a cycle?
Yeah. So every family, and this is what I've learned over the years, that every family, regardless of whether you were the salt of the earth farm raised family that I had, or the prison going city family that I had, every family has some sort of brokenness or bentness that gets passed down, that is problematic within the lines of that family. And so for me, when I was saying that I picked up over the years, there was a pastor that I followed, and he said something, and it stuck with me. I mean, it's been 20 years, it's stuck with me. But it's you can never be set free from anything that you think is normal. And so part of the key to all of our freedom from these patterns is recognizing that that's not normal. It's like my brother. He said, everybody goes to prison.
Yeah.
Everybody goes. What are you talking about? Everybody goes to prison.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting on the outside going, that's not normal.
Yeah.
Like that might be your experience, but that's not normal.
Right.
And so a lot of times we think that our experience is what's normal. And by normal, I mean how we should be designed to operate. We're not designed to commit crime and go to prison. We're not designed to wound one another in that way. We're designed to actually care and have compassion. And so anything that violates that is a brokenness, a bentness in your line, and it passes down. And so for me, I learned early on, even in this farm family, we can look at it and see a pattern of anger. So, and abuse, physical, so my great grandfather, he was abusive to his sons. And so my grandfather, he would be abusive to my dad and his brothers. And it doesn't make them evil people. I love my grandfather. He wasn't abusive to me. Right. But I never experienced any of that. But my father definitely did. I mean, punch in the face. My grandfather was a boxer. And so punch in the face, kind of fighting it with a teenager. Yeah. And so in the scope of that kind of anger and rage, sometimes my the grandfather would come in and just, without any talking at all, just start wailing right on my dad. Jeez. And so my dad decided, and I remember this conversation when I was a teenager. He would talk to me for 45 minutes before he whipped me. Like no lying at all. 45 minutes I'll be sitting in that room waiting on this whipping to happen. Yeah. And he's talking about all the reasons you shouldn't do it, right. What happened, what would happen next time, why he's doing this, and then he'd go back through it again, And I realize now he's probably calming himself down, now that I have kids. But he made a statement when he was a young man. He said, I'm never going to do that to my children. That stops with me. Wow. That was and whether he did that out of like a godly like perspective, I don't think so. But he just knew it was broken.
You remember like the timeline of like how old you were, how old he was, maybe just like when that self-awareness kind of came about?
So for him, I think it was probably, he was a young man, but everybody grew up a lot faster back then. So I think he was probably 18, 19, maybe as much as 20, in his early 20s. Okay. But just that realization that when I have kids, I'm not passing this on. Yeah. And some people say that. People say, I'm not raising my kids like that. Right. But they don't really do anything about it. Yeah. This was him implementing a strategy to his best of his ability. And it was, I'm going to talk to him until he understands and I understand and I'm calm. And then no whipping I ever got, which I got whippings, but none of them could be labeled as abuse. None of them would have been even close. Wow. And so they did the job they were intended to do, which was correct and mold and shape me to make better decisions instead of creating fear of my father, and which then would pass down, if he hadn't broken that, who knows if I would be here today? Yeah. Or my kids, what would I be like with my children,
As you have seen your father implement that for you, how has your mindset been towards your children? Yeah. Well, so knowing
that he had done that, even telling me this as a young man, and I think I was probably an older teen when I kind of got the explanation. At that point, he had already quit whipping me completely. He's just too big for that. But he got to explaining why, because I was telling everybody, man, this dude's talking to me 45 minutes. I'm begging for him to hit me, and he won't quit talking. And he explained why, and that stuck with me. Yeah. And I realized, okay, there's a line, right? I didn't know that, there's a line in a way that you cope with your own anger. And so I did for my kids that same pattern. And I didn't talk 45, I talked 20, but I did have the talk and that's where I think I realized, part of it is calming myself. Right. And then part of it is making sure that they know this is not from a place of hatred. I'm not angry at you. Yeah. And I don't despise you. I'm doing this because I love you, and that is not who we are. Yeah. And that understanding it shaped my family. Now, if I could be honest, that bentness is still there. Like I encountered it myself, because I remember a moment I was having hard times in life, right? We didn't have any money. We were struggling to create ministry, and we had birthed a job. This was like 08, 09 or whatever. And there's, you couldn't buy a job back then. And so it was just a hard time. And I was really mad at myself. I was just angry at the world, at that point. And I walked in one day in the kitchen, and my son, I heard him, he was probably 10 or so, and I heard him smart mouth his mom. Right? And I didn't even hesitate at all. I grabbed a wooden spoon and I launched it on him, and I hit his bottom, thank God, right? But I hit his butt, and I hit him as hard as I can hit him. Like, it wasn't a control like spank. It was, I hit him with all that I had, not because he was so wrong that it deserved it, but because I was so angry and wounded. And that came out. And I mean, I launched him off his feet. And he was bouncing. It looked like, one of those cartoons where the butt's on fire and they're bouncing around trying to put it out. And he was, and that triggered me again. And I was about to whip him again, for crying, from getting whipped, which is crazy. And my wife stopped and she said, okay, I think that's enough. And I realized at that moment, man, I almost recreated that pattern again. And so that was the last time I ever let myself step outside my own rules, which was have the conversation before you spank the kid. That way it's peace, it's love, it's not animosity and anger driving it.
So when you say, it brings an interesting point to my mind, when your father had the realization that, okay, I'm not going to do this to my kids. And then you grew up in that kind of setting. And so you were not technically going to do that for your kids. But it didn't seem like the pattern of something broke, because you still had something in you that brought up the anger. You said the bentness towards that. Can you explain, like, this kind of gets into that generational thing, whether your father realized it and broke the chain? Do you think he actually broke the chain, or is there still something that was lingering from maybe his father to your father to you that gave you that anger? And have you seen it maybe in your son?
So I know not everybody has a faith understanding, or maybe comes from that perspective, but I can only speak from one with an understanding of what faith and spiritual impact is. So we believe wholeheartedly there's an enemy in this world. There's dark forces, we call them demonic or satanic, right? Strongholds and forces at work in our world and in us. They attempt to distract us from what God has created us to be, from being everything He's made us to be, and from interacting and connecting with Him. And so I believe that these broken, bent ways transfer down, not just through experience, but through, there is something called epigenetics. And epigenetics is a fascinating topic. And I'm not going to pretend to be a scientist, but in my understanding, and it's still new. I mean, they only discovered it like 20 years ago, and they've really been pouring into it in the last decade. But there is something that marks our genetics to release a DNA. So DNA is it contains who we are and all of our characteristics and all that stuff. But about 20 years ago, we marked the genome we mapped the human genome, and it didn't help at all. Like, there was virtually no medicine that came from that, no treatments. There was very little. There was a couple, but not a lot. Not what they thought there would be. And so they began to ask, well, there's something else, something we're missing. And they've come to realize it is epigenetics. So there's these things that control what DNA strands release, turn on or turn off, and thus pointing you to respond to an environmental stimulus in a way that's pre-described for you. So this is something that you didn't create. You inherited a tendency toward a thing when given the right environment.
That will stimulate that
would
response.
Stimulate a response that you've been pre-designed to operate by. And unfortunately, those pre-designed markers, they come from our ancestors. So there was a study, a couple experiments that were, I think, so profound, so interesting. One, they took a male mouse, and they introduced the cherry blossom scent to this mouse, and which is normally going to be an attractive scent. I think that's the same scent in oranges and cherries and all these things. But every time they introduced it, they would shock this mouse.
Okay.
And of course, after a while of shocking the mouse over and over again with this, every time it introduces cherry blossom, we know that by Pavlov's conditioning, that the mouse would have a fear response based on the smell. And that's exactly what happened. He would smell cherry blossom, he would automatically freak out, right? Go away from that, whatever that smell was, he just didn't want nothing to do with it.
Right.
And that's all common. We're used to that. The interesting part was they took the semen from that male mouse, impregnated a female mouse that had never met that male mouse.
Okay.
Had pups away from that father mouse. They never met the father mouse.
Yeah. Scandalous.
There's a lot of heat happening. There's a lot of drama in the mouse world. And so this female mouse had these pups. And when they introduced the scent of cherry blossom, those babies, those offspring, had a fear response. They had never encountered electricity. They'd never encountered that smell before, but those offspring encountered it. And what's even more fascinating was they followed those offspring. When they had pups, when they had an offspring, that offspring had it. So the grandchildren of the male that was shocked had fear responses to the odor, to the scent of cherry blossom that crazy. No other mouse had.
That is crazy.
And so they began to open up their brain, and they dissected them. They found that there was actually extra neurons that had been built in certain sections of their brains, designed, and extra neurons, extra scent receptors in their noses, designed to allow them to smell cherry blossom, particularly. And so it created a physical change. It created more neurons and more receptors. It created an emotional response in the creatures, simply based on an environmental exposure to a scent. So it's profound, right? It's crazy to think that would happen.
It's like science has kind of caught up to what maybe biblically we've been talking about.
We've been saying that for years. In the Bible, it tells us that when God has given out the 10 Commandments, when he says, you shall not have any other gods before me, you're not going to make any graven images, any idols. It's at that point that he introduces this side topic, and he says, listen, because I will bring the iniquity of the fathers onto the children to the third and fourth generation. Now, in the Bible, it's a Hebrew idiom, is third and fourth. So it doesn't mean literally it stops after the fourth. The third and fourth to a Hebrew idiom back then would have meant however many. It's like us saying however many. So he's saying, I will visit, or I will allow the results of this iniquity, and kind of understanding, and we don't really use iniquity a lot as a term, right? You don't say your kids are iniquitous children.
What does that mean in today's term?
Yeah, so iniquity, a lot of times we consider, in the English language, we think of iniquity as sin. If someone says that was iniquity, it would mean somebody did something wrong. But that's actually not the Hebrew understanding solely of the word for iniquity. So that word not only means the thing that was done wrong, so the act of sin, but it also means the results that you encounter or you take on yourself as a result of the act of sin. So he is saying in this point, I'm going to allow you to receive the reward that you wanted when you did that wrong thing. Okay, that's what that iniquity moment, that visit the iniquity. So when we introduce bentness, and the word iniquity, it literally means bent. It's a bentness toward something. Everybody has a bentness toward some broken place in their life. They have a tendency. Some is alcoholism or addiction. Some is anger. Some would be depression or anxiety. Like there's all kind of bentness that is not what we know is your best or God's best for you. It's anything away from that we would call a bentness. And so these tendencies to go toward things that are not God's best for you, not how he designed you to be. These are the markers that he's speaking of right there. And so, but the good part is he says, I'll visit blessings for 1,000 generations, right? In other words, if there's a limit to the amount of struggle or punishment or rewards for your bentness that come on your children and your grandchildren.
Right.
When you honor me, because he does say that's specifically for those who don't love me.
Yeah.
So when you don't love him, when you aren't turning to God, it's hard for you to find the source of healing when you won't address the healer, right? And so we can try and do all kind of things that are man-made scenarios, and some of them are great. In the end, I believe that true freedom and true healing comes from a place of encountering God's design and God's blessing and God's favor and God's face being toward you. In his presence, you discover lots of healing.
Yeah.
So,
no, that's good.
let me tell you. Okay, let me bring in this other one. This is really cool. The other experiment that they did.
Oh yeah, I wanted to talk about that. Yeah.
The other experiment they did. I actually saw myself in this experiment. It was pretty crazy. So they took a mouse and this mouse got pregnant, and they had this mouse in a great cage and plenty of good food and all these things. And so the mouse had pups, and these pups grew up to be normal part of mouse culture. They integrated well into mouse society, and they had proper fear responses. They had proper food responses. They were affectionate, so, but she had spent time grooming them and licking them and just really caring for them in the first few weeks of their life.
Okay.
And so they took that same mom mouse and they put her in a different cage, and then they make the food scarce and they make the cage uncomfortable. And that causes the mother mouse to become self-absorbed. So she has to worry about her own survival. She can't quite care for the kids like she wants to. She had another batch of pups. Well, these pups didn't get groomed. They didn't get the licking. They didn't get the affection from their mother in the first few weeks of life. And so they grew up to have health problems. They had higher cases of obesity, diabetes, cancers.
Wow.
And not only that, but they had fear responses that were unusual. They had excessive greed, markers. They didn't respond the way all the other mouses, so they didn't integrate well into mouse culture. And the crazy thing was that their children of those pups had those same characteristics, even if they were never exposed to the same kind of drought or starvation issues. So every generation after that of those mice that didn't get the care they needed early on inherited a brokenness or bentness, some pain that came from the malfunction of the mother. As soon as I learned that, I looked at my life and went, man, that makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
Because my mom left and I didn't get that encounter that I need when I was young. And so that caused me to respond in ways that were not healthy. And so a lot of times for men, we become angry. That's kind of one of our big fear responses, just rage. And so for me, I spent a lot of time when I was young fighting, stealing, trying to just venting this
Somehow.
kind of just letting this anger out.
Right.
And I was just mad at the world. I grew up in a good home. I was loved, I was cared for. But even with all of that care of that environment, the drive to anger was still there. And so I would make decisions that were very toxic, growing up. And also it affected the way I treated people. And so I can say that my kids, my son, who grew up even better than I did, in an environment where he had both of his parents, and he didn't have any of these issues that I faced, and he always grew up in a safe, warm environment with lots of support around him. He also had these anger outbursts and anger responses that we couldn't explain because they were just unreasonable. They were not. You were like, these aren't normal. Like, these aren't normal kid responses. It was excessively angry, and so I came to a place through some spiritual healing that I encountered. We call it freedom ministries, but I began to seek God about what was broken in me. And I'm pastoring already. And I've preached 1,000 messages on forgiveness and healing and all that kind of stuff. But I still was carrying brokenness around. And so I would have major rage interior. And even if you don't express it, but you're feeling it all the time, it eats you alive from the inside. And I had learned enough self-control not to outburst. Although I did sometimes outburst, especially in safe environments or around friends or whatever. I've had some major outbursts. And I've had to have friends like call me down. They call it calling me off the ledge. Because I was about to act up. And luckily I had a good set of friends around that would call that out. But even in all of that, I'm just training my body not to respond to what's happening inside. So that means I'm shoving that anger deeper and deeper into me. And so I encountered the truth of God's word for my life. And so what I did was I asked God, I said, hey, what lie did I believe about myself? And I heard him so clear. It was almost like when you're tying your shoe and your dad's like, you need help? And you're like, no, I'm gonna tie it myself. And you keep struggling and he's just standing there waiting. And you go, okay, Dad, can you help me? You're like, man, I thought you'd never ask. It was like that. It felt like a father going, man, I thought you'd never ask. And it was so fast. He dropped it right in my spirit. He said, you believe you're disposable. And so I took that and I realized it was so confusing for me because it's not how I saw myself. I saw myself very strong and independent, and I saw myself as a leader, and a decision maker, and charismatic, likable. I saw all these things that I just would describe myself as, and disposable seems weak. It seems like something that I would not have described myself as. And so the next question I asked him was, that's okay. Well, if that's the case, then where did that come in? And I can't describe it other than seeing almost like a vision of a movie reel. And I could see my life going backwards. And suddenly I could see myself in the room where my mom left. And I'm standing there in my dad's arms. She's at the door. I see the silhouette. I know that there's bags, like 3 bags at the door, and the room is kind of down, but I know the furniture. I can see the room. I almost smell it. And I wound up going back to my dad and telling him, I said, this is how I saw that moment, and he goes, and he had never described that to me. He never talked to me about it, but he goes, that's exactly what it was like. In that encounter, he took me back through my life, and I could see the stuff that was good and the stuff that was bad. And it was all dictated by that lie. And so what's crazy is that you can have what we call good stuff in your life, and it still be from a bad place. And so it's dysfunctional.
Can you give an example?
Yeah. So when I have a strong work ethic. I've always excelled in any job I did. I move up the ladder quick. I win favor with my bosses because I'm a hard worker. And some of that comes from the farm, right? Being trained in that. And we just work. And so, I pride myself on my work ethic. And I accelerated in business because of that. But I'm not doing it because I want to honor God. I'm doing it so that you have to need me. I wanted my boss to need me more than I needed him.
Make yourself like indispensable.
Indisposable, right? Because I believe that I'm disposable. And so in those situations on the backside of that, if I ever saw a boss that maybe he got disappointed with something or something didn't work out, I would immediately leave and go get another job. Not because it was bad there, but because I don't believe, or I didn't believe, that anyone had the capacity to forgive. I believed that if someone got mad at you or was disappointed in you, they were going to drop you. And so it would cause me to take these relational turns. And so any kind of relationship I had, I would leave you before you left me. I would make it a priority to be on the guard against you leaving. And so the moment I saw something in you that looked like disappointment, I'm out.
Did this affect your dating?
Big time. And the way you treat, females. So if you believe that, people become disposable too. And that's what's crazy is you start putting on people so I created this protection mechanism inside my own mind, which would basically turn off all emotion about someone just like that. Like, so if I could be walking with you, we could be best friends. But if I see something in you that makes me think you're disappointed with me, or you might leave, I'm gonna break that relationship off. And then it's as if you never existed to me. I didn't feel pain. I didn't feel loss. I didn't feel anything. And that actually is scary. You know, when you think like, I should be disappointed in this. I should be hurt by this. This should at least feel something. And I wouldn't feel it. And if I felt it, I would shove it away so fast so that I could move on to another place where I could make them need me, right? I'd want them to need me. And so all of these moments up and down, leaving jobs too early, leaving churches too early, which if you leave a job too early, it can put your family in jeopardy.
Right.
You know, it puts your finances. If you leave a job every year, you're going to have a hard time building a legacy of a career because you're constantly turning over and starting over every couple of years. And so this was kind of a pattern that was a big malfunction for my life. And so once I got free, you know, or saw that, and I asked him, I said, God, if that's the lie, then what's the truth? And he told me that I've never left you and I've never forsaken you, which is a scripture. And I thought up until that moment, that scripture had always been just sort of a poster on a wall.
Yeah.
You know, it's a bookmark that you get in a Christian bookstore somewhere. It's a T-shirt. You know, I'll never leave you, never forsake you. You know, it's just something you read.
Right.
At that point, it turned from what I read. It just turned from some words on a page, and it became revelation. And it wasn't until I got a revelation about how God really saw me that then I could see myself in a different way.
Yeah. No, that's really powerful. Thank you for sharing that and being kind of vulnerable through those stories. Those are, I think, good lessons for all of us because as I kind of reflect on myself or just my family, and I've had some moments where I'm like, I can't do the same thing over and over and expect different results and the insanity kind of, and the buck needs to stop here with me, right? And I've been telling this to my family. I had a conversation with my brother about it last night and said, we got to do something different because it's not working out. Yeah. And somebody has to first recognize it, and in your family it was recognized. And the self-awareness is really key to a lot of spiritual and soul care.
You can't make changes until you know something. You can't be free from anything that you think is normal. And as long as you think it's normal, you won't deal with it.
Yeah.
You know,
like your brothers, right?
Yeah, they won't deal with it. They won't change anything until the moment they go, okay, something's wrong. You know, I think something about the way I think is wrong. You know, and that'll make you at least ask the questions that lead you to the right answers.
Yeah. One of the things that popped in my mind, and maybe this is a little bit off subject, there's a quote, and it goes something like this: hard times create strong men create soft times create weak men. That saying kind of triggered in my mind, and maybe this is related or not related, but your grandfather went through tough times, and your father went through tough times, but each generation got a little bit better. Is there a point to where we have to go back to tough times to have an environment where we cultivate strong men? Or does it like always get better and then we just eventually become a weak society or something? You know,
the rest of that statement is hard times create tough men. Tough men create soft times create weak men create hard times.
And then it kind of
then it starts over again. And so 100%.
Do you see our society gravitating towards harder times?
Yeah, I believe that we're actually in hard times, and so we see the early onset of a victim mentality that I believe started. So that's why you see such strong generational differences. All right, so I'm Gen X. And if you ask any Gen X person, they're like, we're the best, right? The Gen X think they're the toughest people on the planet. And so a lot of it was because times were hard on our parents. And so a lot of our parents, we kind of raised ourselves. So we would be on the, we call them latchkey kids, right? Everybody would come home, they fed themselves, they clothed themselves, they washed their own clothes, they made their own meals. And we joke all the time, like when I was out playing with friends, if we needed something to drink, we found someone's water hose. Like we found, you'd find water, you'd find the thing that you needed. We always knew there was a lady in the neighborhood who would give you a snack.
Yeah.
Like we would just go get it, like, and we go pick some oranges off the field to feed ourselves. Like we would just, you sort of become self-sufficient, right?
Yeah.
Well, that creates a world where you have a tougher stance on brokenness. But if you're not careful, that'll also make you hide brokenness. And so I think that is one of our concerns, is that we tend to push down the brokenness. Now, over the last couple generations, millennials, Gen Z, especially, you see it in them, is this understanding of looking on the inside of who I am, which is beautiful if it's done in order. So if I'm looking on the inside of myself to find who to blame, that's never gonna work.
Yeah.
That's never gonna work. Like I'm not mad at my great grandfather for being angry. I was angry, but someone's just gotta stop it. And I have to take a stand to go, okay, that's it. I'm gonna make some changes. I'm gonna own this thing, because that's not normal. And what we tend to see today is a generation of young people, who identify themselves with their broken place. I know growing up for me, the brokenness would have been seen and spoken to like that's not good, even though we were taught that men were just angry. Those things that wasn't good either. There's got to be a position where we don't identify with the brokenness. That's just normalizing the wound or the bentness. But where we look at it and are honest, and so it's this combination of the two. It's this place we got to get to where we go, yeah, man, I should be living like this.
Yeah.
Like this isn't normal. This is how God created me to be.
Yeah.
And so as a result, I'm gonna have to do some things that are unusual for my life or for my family. I'm gonna have to make some changes. And I see a lot of young people that just go, well, this thing is broken in me, so just honor my brokenness. Will you just call my brokenness great? Will you just tell me how awesome this broken place is? And we're sitting there going no, that's gonna ruin your life.
Yeah.
Like that is not God's best for you.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you're bad or worthless or you lose value. We all are broken in different ways, but you can't get to a place where you accept it as if that's just an identity feature. There's a difference between how you're created and the impact of brokenness on your life. And you got to know the difference and be able to speak to it.
That gives us a lot to reflect on. And as I listen to you and as our audience listens to you, if something triggers you and you want to connect, drop a comment below with the word freedom and we will connect with you.
And this is the good news about that,
Yeah.
is that there's change.
Yeah, there is.
Epigenetics, even the physical DNA markers can be changed. And they can be changed in one generation.
Yeah.
Like they can be changed by your decisions. And so that shifts the rest of the lineage of your line. A lot of times we want to honor a family. And so we don't talk about family. Like, so we don't talk about our generational patterns because we're worried we're going to offend dad or papa or granny or what, we think if I talk about their broken places, then I'm dishonoring them. Yeah. And the truth is, you got to understand, broken places don't make you bad people.
Yeah.
That doesn't make you bad.
Yeah.
Like, and so Granny isn't bad because you acknowledge her brokenness.
Yeah.
Granny isn't bad because you recognize Granny was a gossip.
Yeah.
You just are recognizing a pattern in her life that you don't want to transfer to your children. And the most you can do, the best way to honor your family legacy is not to continue brokenness,
right,
but to fix brokenness, to change the course of your family.
I wrote your quote here. This is like, I think the highlight of it. If you want to read it here, but it's, you're not being honoring in your family by continuing brokenness. You can only honor your family when you break the line of brokenness and decide we are going to be marked by a different spirit. Yeah. And I think that's powerful. And that's kind of what you're saying, right?
I want to make it practical. How do we have these conversations with our family about these things without being disrespectful?
Yeah. Well, so first of all is seeing them, right? You got to recognize the thing you want to talk about, the broken place that's going on in your family. And then to make sure that you're in a healthy place mentally at the moment that you go to have this conversation. If I'm keyed up, I'm gonna have a keyed up conversation. So I can't be angry at dad and then try to tell dad what he did wrong, right? Yeah. That's never going to work, because when I share it, I'm not going to be sharing it from a place of love. Right. I'm going to be sharing it from a place of justice. I'm needing justice for your malfunction. And if I ever get into a place where I'm demanding your justice, I've already lost the battle, because I need forgiveness on my part, because forgiveness it doesn't mean that it never happened. But forgiveness allows me to operate without owing each other anything. Okay. So if I release you from all obligation to owe me payback for the malfunction that I saw in you, or that we inherited, then we get to have an even conversation. Because as long as you owe me, now there's power dynamics in a conversation. I feel like you owe me, and until you say you're sorry, I can't talk to you about this. Well, that's unhealthy. That's just a brokenness in you that you're trying to get brokenness in someone else out of. And so the best way is to always make sure you're in a great place. You do the things you got to do. Get along with God. Shut off the news. Shut off some of the social media stuff that gets you keyed up. All right, just make sure you're in a healthy place. Spend some time. For me, I have an instrumental called "Soaking in His Presence." It's an instrumental worship, and literally just it sets me into a mindset of calm and peace, where I can think, and have conversations that are articulate. And so when you do bring these up, it's important to have conversations that are based on the topic, not the person. Yeah. So it's not Granny, the gossiper. It's the gossip that Granny did, right? It's not the anger. It's not Dad, the rage machine. It's the rage that I see in Dad. So I'm addressing the issue, not the person. Because you'll never get to a healthy place telling people how broken they are. Right. You have to deal with brokenness and then help walk people to it, and be patient, because it's going to take people. Not everybody is where you are developmentally, even maturity. Yeah. You can be mature in one area of your life and immature in another. And so just because your parents or your grandpa is old, don't mean they're mature. Right. And so you gotta you wouldn't get angry at a child because they spilled a cup of milk. Well, it's just what kids do. They're immature. They're not developed yet. And so this aspect of their life has not been developed. So let's be patient. It may take multiple conversations, years of conversations, but if they don't believe you love them while you do it, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
Could you recommend a resource that we could read, listen, watch, that would help us with our soul care, spiritual care?
I would recommend the book Soul Care by Rob Reimer, and you can check that out online. But there's also a set of story or devotionals that you can do. If you go to the Bible app, and YouVersion Bible app, you can look on there for Bible study plans around soul care. There's some really good ones there that I've done myself. It's been awesome. Did a retreat, and I got those while I did the retreat. It was fantastic. Also, I would recommend our freedom ministries, our freedom classes. So you can go to wearecrossing.com/freedom, and you can get access to our online freedom classes. And then every couple times a year, we have an event called Kairos. So after you've taken freedom classes and learn the information of how we get free and how to address these lies, then we have an actual activation event called Kairos.
Can you tell us how we could connect with you at a more personal level if we want to reach out and if we have questions?
Yeah, so you can always find us online at wearecrossing.com, and my information will be on there under our staff. But you can email me at mpippin@crossingonline.org, and I'd be happy to help out any way I can.
I want to thank you for coming today. It's been a real honor. Thank you for helping us lead transformation from the inside out.
Absolutely. Happy to help.
Michael likes the house a little bit, so I
yeah.
brought him here. Instead
Definitely
of,
like the lake. I'm dreaming of fishing right now.
Oh yeah,
There's
it's
some
actually-
prime spots right there, right off this dock.
There's like some
fantastic.
gators out here that they've caught. It's probably-
Well, you know how to find if a body of water in Florida has gators in it?
it's just always has gators.
Well, if you put your hand in it and it's wet,